My son texted, "Don't you dare wear that silly costume." My brother laughed, saying, "It's just a Halloween outfit." But when I walked in with 4 stars on my shoulders, the commander's voice thundered, "General on deck!" In that instant, my son's face turned white. I never imagined my life would twist into such a scene of irony and redemption, where decades of sacrifice and service would be reduced to a cruel joke, only to be vindicated in the most powerful way imaginable. To truly understand what happened that day, the day my family finally saw who I really was, you need to know the long, difficult road that carried me there. A road paved with sacrifices they never witnessed, doubts they never understood, and quiet moments of honor that no one outside the uniform ever truly comprehends. My name is James Harrington, and for more than 3 decades, I have worn the uniform of the United States Army with a pride that has never wavered, even when those closest to me questioned everything I stood for. I was born into a modest family in a small coastal town, where dreams were measured in steady paychecks rather than lofty aspirations. My father worked as a machinist at the local shipyard, a practical man who believed in predictable work and reliable wages, not the uncertainty that came with military service. My mother, Caroline, gentle, patient, and endlessly supportive, held our household together with quiet strength, though I could see the worry in her eyes whenever I spoke about my future plans. My older brother Robert was everything I wasn't. Loud, charismatic, effortlessly popular. The kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately become its center of attention. From my earliest memories, I was drawn to order and structure in ways that set me apart from my family and peers. Where Robert saw freedom as life's greatest gift, I found purpose in discipline and routine. Where my father valued security and predictability, I was drawn to something larger than myself, something that demanded excellence and sacrifice. That fundamental difference created a chasm between us that would only widen with time. Robert dismissed my seriousness as uptight behavior, mocked my structured approach to life, and treated my military ambitions as nothing more than childish fantasies I would eventually outgrow. Years later, after I had built my own family, the pattern repeated itself in ways that cut even deeper. My wife Caroline, named after my mother, in a moment of sentimentality I've never regretted, did her absolute best to maintain stability at home, while I served our country in places she could barely pronounce. But my long deployments, missed birthdays, and frequent absences took their toll on her, and especially on our son Ethan. He grew up seeing more photographs of his father than the man himself, sitting at dinner tables where my chair remained conspicuously empty, celebrating milestones with a parent who existed more as an idea than a daily presence. By the time Ethan reached his teenage years, he had inherited Robert's talent for cutting remarks and dismissive humor. Where I saw honor in service, he saw nothing but elaborate theater. Where I found meaning in duty and sacrifice, he saw only a costume I wore to play pretend soldier. The distance between us had become an ocean of misunderstanding that I didn't know how to cross. The call to service first reached me at 10 years old, standing on the weathered pier that jutted into our town's harbor, like a finger pointing toward destiny. I was watching a Navy destroyer cut through the gray waters, its steel hull moving with the kind of purposeful grace that only comes from absolute discipline and unity of mission. To most people walking past that day, it was just another military vessel passing through our small coastal port. To me, it represented everything I didn't yet have the words to express: honor, purpose, and the chance to be part of something infinitely larger than the modest life my family had mapped out for me. That single moment planted a seed that would grow through every year of my adolescence, sustained by stories I heard from an old Navy veteran at our church. He would occasionally share tales of service and sacrifice that made my heart race with possibility. While my classmates spent their summer afternoons chasing temporary thrills and fleeting entertainment, I dedicated myself to building the physical and mental foundation that would make me worthy of wearing the uniform. I ran miles along the coastline before dawn, lifted weights in our makeshift garage gym, and studied military history with the intensity of a scholar. preparing for the most important examination of his life. Robert found my dedication amusing at best and irritating at worst, rarely missing an opportunity to mock what he saw as my obsessive behavior. He had inherited our mother's gentle nature, but combined it with a sharp wit that could cut deep when he wanted it to, and he frequently referred to me as the family robot, programmed for duty rather than capable of genuine human emotion. My father's reaction was more subtle but perhaps more damaging. Not outright opposition, but a silence that spoke volumes about his doubts regarding my chosen path. His unspoken message was clear. This military fantasy was a mistake that would only lead to disappointment and regret. Their skepticism only strengthened my resolve. During my college years, ROTC became my sanctuary, the one place where my natural inclination toward discipline and structure was not only accepted but celebrated. The early morning drills, the demanding physical training, the camaraderie forged through shared challenge and mutual dependence. It was the world I had been unconsciously searching for since that day on the pier. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider trying to fit into someone else's definition of normal. I felt like I belonged to something meaningful and enduring. But military service extracts a price that becomes clear only after the commitment has been made and the uniform earned. While I was building my career and serving in places that tested every aspect of my character and capability, Caroline bore the weight of maintaining our household and raising Ethan largely alone. Birthday parties proceeded without me. School events happened in my absence. Family traditions evolved around the reality of my frequent deployments. I convinced myself that my service was protecting them, providing them with security and a legacy they could be proud of. But Ethan didn't experience my absence as protection. He experienced it as abandonment. And in the fertile ground of that perceived abandonment, resentment took root and flourished, eventually growing into the kind of cynical dismissal that would wound me more deeply than any enemy fire ever could. The Army doesn't distribute promotions like participation trophies or birthday gifts. You earn every rank through blood, sweat, and decisions that follow you for the rest of your life. Choices made in moments when hesitation can mean the difference between bringing your soldiers home or writing letters to their families. Over 3 decades of service, I commanded troops in deserts where the heat could kill you as efficiently as enemy fire, in jungles where every shadow might conceal death, and in urban warfare zones where the line between combatant and civilian blurred into moral complexity that haunted my sleep for months afterward. I had watched young men and women follow my orders into situations that tested the very limits of human courage and endurance. Some returned changed but whole. Others came back broken in ways that no amount of medical care could fully repair. And some, too many, never made it home at all. Their final moments played out under my command, their sacrifice becoming part of the weight I carried in my chest every single day. Each promotion brought greater responsibility, more lives depending on my judgment, more families whose futures hung in the balance of decisions I made in split seconds under impossible pressure. When the message finally arrived, informing me that I would receive my 4th star, the rank of general, an honor achieved by fewer than 200 officers in the entire history of the United States Army, I felt something far more complex than simple triumph or satisfaction. 4 stars meant recognition at the highest levels of military leadership, a legacy that would outlast my own life, and authority that came with the profound responsibility of stewarding an institution that had shaped the course of nations. But beneath that professional achievement lay a more personal question that gnawed at my heart. Would my own family even recognize the significance of what I had accomplished? Or would they see it as just another costume in my dress-up game? The night before the promotion ceremony, as I sat in my study surrounded by commendations, photographs from deployments, and mementos from a lifetime of service, my phone buzzed with a text message from Ethan. The words appeared on my screen like a physical blow. "Don't you dare wear that silly costume." Before I could even process the full impact of his dismissal, another message arrived from Robert, complete with laughing emojis, and a comment about Halloween coming early this year. I stared at their messages until the words blurred, feeling decades of sacrifice reduced to a family joke. For a brief moment, I seriously considered uninviting them both, protecting this sacred milestone from their mockery and cynicism. Why subject myself to their disrespect on what should be one of the most meaningful days of my career? But then, as I sat there in the silence of my study, surrounded by the evidence of a life spent in service to something greater than myself, I realized that this moment wasn't just about me. This was the reckoning I had unknowingly been preparing for my entire adult life. The chance to show them, without explanation or defense, what the uniform truly represented, not through words they could dismiss or arguments they could deflect, but through a demonstration of respect and honor that would speak for itself in ways that no amount of conversation ever could. The ceremony hall stretched before me, like a cathedral of military tradition, its vaulted ceiling hung with the battle flags of units that had written their names in history through courage and sacrifice. Every seat was filled with men and women in pristine uniforms, their ribbons and insignia telling stories of deployments, campaigns, and service that spanned decades of American military history. The silence in that vast space was profound and reverent, the kind of quiet that comes only when people understand they are witnessing something sacred and historically significant. When I stepped through the entrance doors, with 4 silver stars gleaming on my shoulders, time seemed to suspend itself, that crystalline moment between anticipation and recognition. The weight of those stars felt heavier than any equipment I had ever carried into combat, not because of their physical mass, but because of everything they represented: the trust of a nation, the legacy of those who had worn them before me, and the responsibility for the lives and careers of thousands of soldiers who would serve under my command. Then it came, the command that would forever change how my family saw me, delivered in the clear, powerful voice of the presiding commander that cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "General on deck." The transformation that followed was nothing short of breathtaking, a choreographed display of respect that unfolded with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the power of thunder rolling across mountains. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. More than 250 soldiers rose from their seats as one unified force. Their movement created a sound like distant thunder as boots shifted in perfect unison and chairs scraped against the polished floor. Arms snapped to salute position with the sharp crack of disciplined precision, creating a forest of raised hands that stretched across the entire assembly. The sight was magnificent and humbling. Row after row of America's finest men and women, veterans of conflicts around the globe, standing in recognition of the rank I had spent 3 decades earning through blood, sweat, and unwavering dedication to something greater than myself. In the midst of this powerful demonstration of military respect and tradition, I found them. My family sat in a section reserved for honored guests, and the transformation in their faces was immediate and unmistakable. Ethan's smartphone, which had seemed permanently attached to his hand throughout his teenage years, slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. His eyes widened with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock, awe, and the dawning realization that his father was not the man he had imagined him to be. His face drained of color as the magnitude of what he was witnessing began to penetrate the cynical armor he had constructed around himself. Robert, my brother who had spent decades perfecting the art of the dismissive smirk and the cutting remark, sat frozen in his chair with his mouth slightly open, his usual quick wit rendered completely speechless by the display of respect surrounding him. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he had no joke to make, no sarcastic comment to deflate the moment, no way to diminish what was unfolding before his eyes. And my father, my practical, skeptical father, who had spent years doubting my chosen path, straightened in his seat with an expression of pride that I had waited my entire lifetime to see. His weathered machinist's hands gripped the arms of his chair, as decades of unspoken approval finally found their voice in the tears that glistened in his eyes. Ceremonies fade into memory like photographs tucked away in albums, their formal moments captured in official records and archived speeches. Medals are pinned with practiced precision. Photographs are taken for posterity. Applause eventually dies down to respectful silence, and the crowd disperses back to their everyday lives. But what endures long after the last uniform is folded away are the unscripted moments that no ceremony planner could have orchestrated. The quiet conversations that happen in shadows. The looks exchanged when no cameras are rolling. The words that carry weight precisely because they were never meant for public consumption. I walked outside into the cool evening air that followed the ceremony, seeking a moment of solitude to process what had just transpired. The formal proceedings had gone exactly as planned, but the emotional weight of seeing my family's transformation still felt surreal, like watching scenes from someone else's life unfold in front of me. The stars on my shoulders felt different now, not heavier with responsibility, though that remained, but somehow more authentic. Validated not just by military protocol, but by the recognition I had seen in the eyes of the people whose opinions mattered most to me. Ethan was waiting for me in the quiet corridor outside the ceremonial hall, his usual confident posture replaced by something I hadn't seen since he was a small child. Uncertainty mixed with genuine respect. For the first time in years, my son had nothing to say. No quick comeback. No dismissive joke to deflect the seriousness of the moment. His silence was not the rebellious quiet of a teenager refusing to engage, but the thoughtful pause of a young man, finally beginning to understand the complexity of the world he was inheriting. The phone that had delivered his cruel text message remained forgotten in his pocket, replaced by an awareness that his father was perhaps not the man he had spent years caricaturing in his mind. Robert appeared next, approaching with uncharacteristic hesitancy, his usual arsenal of humor nowhere to be found. When he reached out to pat my back, the gesture carried none of his typical performative quality. It was simple, genuine acknowledgement from a brother who had spent decades misunderstanding what my service truly meant. The man who could always find something witty to say about any situation stood there in the presence of something that rendered his clever remarks inadequate and inappropriate. My father's approach was the most profound of all. This practical man, who had spent years quietly doubting whether I had chosen the right path, now moved with the careful dignity of someone who finally understood the magnitude of what his son had accomplished. The tears that glistened in his weathered eyes spoke louder than any words of apology or explanation ever could have, carrying decades of unspoken pride and perhaps regret for the years when his silence had felt more like disapproval than protective concern. No words were exchanged between us in those precious minutes, but conversation would have felt inadequate to the moment anyway. For over 3 decades, I had fought battles on foreign soil, led soldiers through impossible situations, and earned the respect of military leaders around the world. But the hardest campaign had always been here at home, winning the recognition and understanding of the people who shared my name and my blood. That night, standing in the quiet aftermath of ceremony and spectacle, I finally achieved the victory that had eluded me for my entire adult life. The uniform had never been a costume or a role I played for public consumption. It was the physical manifestation of my deepest beliefs about duty, service, and sacrifice. And finally, beautifully, my family saw it too. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Every voice has value.